Well, to discuss further the rebasing of the country's GDP figures, I have with me, joining me on the news at 10, Dr. Ayo Teriba. He is an economist. You're welcome to the news at 10.
Thank you.
So really, what are your thoughts on the rebased GDP figures?
Well, it's coming a bit late.
Really?
That's 24 years
Okay.
since the last rebasing, but it's better late than never. And 24 years, well, from the last base to the current base, you have 20 years. You should rebase every 5 years. So we are having like times 4, of the effect that we'd get if we had been rebasing every 5 years.
What sort of effects will those be?
We got the increase in the gross domestic product, the increase in the economic output as a result of the rebasing is about 60%, which works out like if you had been rebasing every 5 years, you would get an average of 15% every 5 years. So delaying it for 2 decades, gives you this big effect that the economic activity taking place in the country is 60% higher than we have cared to capture. So the initial thoughts is that we're happy to get closer to reality.
So will the rebasing affect economic indices like consumer inflation rates? I mean, I think what I'm really trying to ask is how it has really affected the common man on the streets. Or has it not?
Well, first is that what we measure follows what is happening. What affects the common man on the street is what is happening. And the figures that we used to have before the rebasing understated what was happening. So the rebased figures gives us a clearer picture of what's happening. So it's actually the opposite, that we have understated the reality that the common man on the street was facing. We had given the impression that the economy was 40 trillion large, but after the rebasing, we discovered that the economy is much bigger than 40 trillion. In 2013, the new estimate for 2013 is 80 trillion. We've been saying, therefore, that the well-being of the common man was half of what it truly is.
These figures are huge, and they're quite, mind-boggling to anyone who's listening, anyone who's not really into economics and so on. But I understand that you are one of the experts who also worked on arriving at these figures. How were they arrived at? What's the indices for arriving at these rebased GDP figures?
Yeah, I'm one of the experts that validated the outcome. It was the National Bureau of Statistics that arrived at the outcome, supported by...
You validated?
We validated after they arrived at the outcome. And how they arrived at it is that, the last base, 1990, there are a number of activities that were not significant in the Nigerian economy, e.g., telecoms. As of 1990, you had a government monopoly running the telecom sector.
Which was NITEL.
So how you account for a government monopoly is different from how you account for what happened 11 years after that rebasing, where the government monopoly was broken and new players were licensed. And those new players have mobilized huge investments connected with the consumers. We had 300,000 lines as of year 2000 or 2001. Here, now I understand we have 120 million lines. So the new rebasing will capture the activities of the newly licensed telecom services providers. We capture the activities of their suppliers. We capture the activities of their distributors. And it's huge. And you're talking of about 6 trillion naira, newly, captured activities.
Okay, sorry, I have to cut in here because since we're talking about growing activities, now one of the fastest growing activities post-rebasing is electricity and gas. Now, how is this possible with the drop in power supply?
Electricity and gas, I'm not... Okay, the biggest jumps in the figures, if we're going to follow the figures, the biggest jump occurred in telecoms. Well, information and communication, which includes telecoms and entertainment. So Nollywood, that had been insignificant as of 1990, has grown then since, and is now very significant. Like 1 trillion that we had not captured, we had not recorded in the GDP prior to this rebasing. And in telecoms, like 6 trillion.
But I asked about electricity and gas.
It's not as large.
In Nollywood is obvious, but so is electricity.
Electricity
and
is
gas.
not as large. The deregulation of electricity happened only very recently. A few years down the road, they might become as big, as telecoms or entertainment. Gas is not a giant in this exercise. As a matter of fact, the contribution of oil and gas is the one that's recorded the most significant drop. As of 2010, whereas sectors like information and communication, like trade, jumped like 5-6 trillion, oil and gas dropped 6 trillion.
And I'm afraid that is where we would have to leave it tonight. I'd love to continue chatting with you, Dr. Ayo Teriba. Thank you so much for joining us on The News at 10. Dr. Ayo Teriba is an economist. He was also one of the experts who worked on validating the rebased GDP figures.